The other house. Sammy approached from the sidewalk following the sharp whine of a buzzsaw. Peered into the open garage, heart hammering, unsure what he'd find there. 5 o'clock in the morning, 2 or 3 months before Christmas, air crisp and crunch of leaves everywhere. Mr. Wallace, he'd heard, had been a butcher, and maybe he was sawing deer meat or making sausages, but it didn't smell like that. Sammy caught a fresh trail of fine powder, fragrant like his mother's cedar hope chest, and followed the spectral cloud as it blew into the drive, gathering at last on the edge of dying grass. Normally, he would have simply chucked the paper, gloated as it spiraled up the drive, and hightailed it out of there. But when he peered into the garage, his chest seized. He couldn't swallow. Under a large halogen lamp there stood 2 rudimentary frames, like giant dog houses, each supported on a pair of sawhorses, almost too big for the garage, which explained why Mr. Wallace had to leave his pickup on the curb. Sammy didn't know how long he'd been standing there, waiting for his vital signs to return before Mr. Wallace, sensing his presence, turned around, starting just a little before he smiled and waved. He turned off his saw, waddled over, wiping his big ashen hands on his shop apron. "You must be the new boy," he said. Sammy nodded, though he'd been delivering the paper for nearly 6 months. Then he reached into his canvas bag and produced a Daily Sun. "Last one, eh?" Sammy looked into the bag just to be sure, glanced up at Mr. Wallace, who tucked the paper under his right arm. "What are you doing in there?" the boy asked. Mr. Wallace scratched his chin, set the paper on the edge of his workbench, and moved towards Sammy. The boy took a step back just in case he had to bolt. "What does it look like I'm doing, son?" "I'm not sure. I guess it looks like you're building a miniature city or something." Mr. Wallace chuckled. "I like the way you think. What'd you say your name was?" He stooped to pick up a piece of scrap wood, and without looking, tossed it behind him where it landed with a thud inside a large cardboard box. "I didn't." "I'm Bud," the man said. "Bud Wallace." He extended his meaty palm. Sammy took a step back. I know who you are," he said. Bud Wallace removed his safety goggles, wiped at the yellow glass with the corner of his apron before folding the frames into the crook of his shirt. "Son, what do they call you?" "Sammy, I guess. That's my name." "Are you sure?" Sammy grinned. "You're the Sampson boy, aren't you?" "I know your father," Bud Wallace said. "Damn shame, but you seem to be doing all right." Sammy blinked. "You got a sister too, am I right?" Sammy shrugged. "We live up the street from here, the yellow house on the corner." "I know." "Well, I better let you get back to it, whatever it is you're doing in there." Mr. Wallace grimaced. "Don't you want to know?" "I do. I've got to swear you to secrecy first." "I won't tell no one," Sammy said. "Promise?" "Scout's honor." Mr. Wallace waggled his chin until his jaw popped. "These here are 2 doll houses, you see, Sammy." "Of course." Sammy couldn't believe he'd been so stupid. "You want to see what they're going to look like when they're done? I mean, unless you got to be somewhere. I don't want to keep you." He didn't, unless it was school, and still plenty of time for that. The boy pressed into the garage. Near the door that led into the house, Bud Wallace pointed to a set of blueprints. "Here, you hold on to this end here," the man said, and Sammy splayed the dark tips of his dirty fingers, smudging the edge of the thick paper, steadying it against the end of the workbench. Mr. Wallace walked the plans out, taking 5 or 6 steps back. "That's it. That's what we're building." Sammy whistled, caught himself, shook his head. "Why 2, Mr. Wallace?" Bud Wallace looked at him and grinned and began to roll up the blueprint. "Just as easy to build 2 as 1, he said, snapping a rubber band on the plans and tossing them onto the crowded workbench. "Here's the thing. Can you keep a secret?" "Another secret." Sammy felt a little tickle as he nodded, taken into Mr. Wallace's confidence. "How old are you, Sammy? I mean, if you don't mind me asking." Sammy held up 2 hands. My granddaughter's about your age, Chloe, 7, or will be before the end of the year." "I'm older," Sammy said. "Yes, you are, yes, but not much." 3 years might not have seemed like much to Bud Wallace, but it was a lot to Sammy. After his father had left, he'd had to become the dad. That's what his mother had said, and he'd never once thought to challenge it. So far it hadn't amounted to much, just being there whenever she felt bad, thinking first of others instead of himself. That was her main gripe. He'd be the first to admit it hadn't come naturally. Sammy looked up at the 2 towering structures again, reaching out absent-mindedly to touch one. "Careful," Bud Wallace said. The boy peered inside, 2 floors in each, and though they were completely empty now, barely more than frames, it wasn't difficult to imagine what they'd look like when finished. Christmas was coming up. Sammy's sister Sarah might want one, a chance to be thoughtful. Why 2? Sammy asked again, already thinking maybe he could reach some kind of arrangement with Mr. Wallace. Perhaps if he agreed to shovel his walks or deliver his paper for free, he'd eat the cost. He held his breath, tried to imagine what she'd think, finding a giant dollhouse next to the tree on Christmas morning. It was so big it wouldn't fit under the tree. He could even tell his sister it was a gift from their father. Sammy nodded in the direction of the dollhouses. What you going to do with the other one, I mean? Oh, well, I think my wife has some design to donate it to a charity, Sammy. The color went out of the boy's face. He nodded, lips rigid, chewed on the insides of his cheeks. You know, they'll probably auction it, Sammy. That would be my guess. Why? Sammy nodded gravely, looked down at his worn cowboy boots. Then he thought maybe he could buy it, and if not, maybe he could bid on it. Why not? His eyes brightened and he looked up. How much do you think it'll go for, Mr. Wallace? Oh, I don't know that I could rightly say, Sammy. Mr. Wallace gave him a puzzled look. But if you had to guess. No way of knowing, really. Bud Wallace hooked his thumbs in his apron and regarded the boy with a wry smile. Why are you so interested in a dollhouse anyway, kid? Sammy tried to laugh. He knew he was just being stupid. I'm not. Well, I guess I better be going, he said, and he started to back out of the garage. Whole way home, though, he was thinking about those twin dollhouses, one a mirrored reflection of the other, each posed like the bright wings of a butterfly. It was all he could think about during school. And that night he dreamt Bud Wallace had decided to let him build one beside the other 2 with the scraps. He figured with Mr. Wallace's help, there was no reason why it wouldn't be just as spectacular. Except when they finished, he'd found it was smaller than the others and slanted, even though he'd stuck closely to the plans. So small when he tried to put his foot inside, one of the outer walls collapsed and Bud looked at him horrified and Sammy didn't know what to do. The boy just sort of growled, like one of those movie monsters. And in the dream, Bud Wallace smiled, which only encouraged him. Sammy howled and beat his chest, burped until he'd emitted a ball of fire, and the nearest wall began to crackle like a Christmas log. Next thing he knew, he was clawing at the wainscoting of the other 2 houses, except they no longer looked like the ones in the garage. They were finished now, covered in fur, and they appeared to be breathing. Mr. Wallace grabbed him from behind, and Sammy screamed and woke with a start, head wet on his pillow.